You know, when you hear the word health, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's probably diet, exercise, getting enough sleep, all physical stuff, right? But what if that's just one piece of a much, much bigger puzzle?
So let's just start with a really big question. Is being healthy simply not being sick? Or is true well-being something deeper, a state of balance that has to include our minds and maybe even our spirits? Today, we're going to explore a tradition that gives a huge yes to that second question.
The framework we're diving into is called Tibb an-Nabawi, which you can think of as prophetic medicine. Now, this is so much more than just a list of remedies. It's a whole world view where your body, mind, and spirit are seen as one single, integrated system. The goal isn't just to treat an illness, it's about achieving this complete, harmonious state of being. So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at how this view of healing is really different from what many of us are used to. Then we'll break down the three core pillars: the physical, the mental and emotional, and the spiritual. And then at the end, we'll bring it all back together.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, a different view of healing. Here we're going to contrast two very different ways of looking at what it means to be well. At the very heart of this entire approach is a really powerful principle called physis. It's this core belief that the body has an incredible built-in ability to heal itself. So the goal isn't necessarily to attack a disease from the outside, but to work with the body to support and strengthen its own natural healing power. And this is where you can really see the contrast. The worldviews themselves are just fundamentally different. One is creation-based and rooted in an Islamic ethos, while the other is more secular. And that starting point changes everything. Tibb an-Nabawi wants to restore the body's natural balance, its homeostasis, by supporting that inner healing force, that physis. Conventional medicine, on the other hand, often takes a more targeted approach, focusing on destroying a specific germ or microbe to get rid of the symptom.
Okay, so let's get practical and move to our first pillar in section 2, nourishing the physical body. This is where we get into the really tangible, day-to-day advice for our physical health.
What's so amazing here is the beautiful simplicity. This quote, it's not some complicated diet plan. It is a simple but profound principle for physical balance. Basically, don't stuff yourself. Leave room. 1/3 for food, 1/3 for drink, and maybe most importantly, 1/3 for your breath. And when illness does show up, the remedies suggested are often really simple and natural. Things like cooling a fever with water, using a natural herb like senna for constipation, or even treating a wound with a specific mix of soil and saliva. It's all about working with the body's systems, gently nudging it back toward health.
And this right here reveals a core ethical principle. There's a really clear line drawn. If a substance is considered inherently harmful, like alcohol, you can't use it as a medicine. The thinking is that a cure can't come from something that is itself considered a disease. The remedy has to be pure.
All right, that brings us to our second pillar in section 3, healing the mind and heart. And this is where we see just how deeply our mental and emotional well-being are woven into this whole picture of health. See, this isn't just about the brain or our thoughts. This model of who we are is much more layered. It includes the heart, or qalb, as the center of our emotions and spiritual insight, the soul, or ruh, and even our desires and ego, the nafs.
A huge part of healing the mind is learning to spot these unhealthy thought patterns we can all get stuck in, what modern psychology calls cognitive distortions. A really common one is black and white thinking. This is that all or nothing trap, right? If something isn't perfect, we see it as a total failure. There's just no room for a middle ground.
And here's a perfect example of how that can play out in a spiritual context. A person might start thinking, okay, if I'm absolutely perfect, then and only then will I be worthy of God's mercy. But this just sets up an impossible standard that can actually lead to despair and a feeling of distance, instead of closeness and hope.
But the good news is, there's a really practical 3-step way to challenge this. First, you just have to catch the thought, identify it. Second, you have to recognize the crazy, unrealistic pressure it's putting on you. And third, you actively replace it with something more balanced, more true, and frankly, more compassionate.
And this leads to such a beautiful insight. Virtues like sabr, or patience, they're not just seen as nice moral ideas. They're actually considered powerful medicine. Patience is described as the ultimate protector of health for the entire self, your heart, your body, and your soul.
Now we're going to move to our third and final pillar, section 4, the unseen spiritual dimension. And this is an area of health that many modern approaches,
well, they just don't really have a category for it.
In this framework, some problems aren't seen as purely physical or psychological. There's a belief in this unseen spiritual reality, where forces like jinn, which are unseen beings, or even things like witchcraft can directly impact a person's well-being, along with concepts like the evil eye or intense envy.
So how are these kinds of spiritual ailments addressed? The primary method is known as ruqyah. You can think of it as a form of spiritual healing. It involves reciting specific verses from the Qur'an, actively seeking refuge and protection in God, and making specific prayers that are prescribed for treatment.
And there's this pretty remarkable story that illustrates this. A man gets bitten by a scorpion, and one of the Prophet's companions recites al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran, over him, and he's instantly cured. It's a really powerful example of the healing power attributed to these spiritual practices.
And this isn't just about fending off external afflictions. Spiritual practices are a core part of emotional healing, too. There are specific supplications and remembrances prescribed for moments of grief or deep sadness, and they're believed to have the power to actually lift that distress and replace it with peace and joy.
And that leads us right into our final section, where we get to pull all of these different threads together. Section 5, Body, Mind, and Spirit, fully integrated. So if there is one single thing to take away from our time together today, this is it. The body, the mind, and the spirit are not separate things in different boxes that we treat in isolation. They're completely and deeply interwoven, all parts of one single holistic self. A pain in the body can absolutely affect the spirit. A worry in the mind can show up as a physical symptom. And when you heal one part, you help heal the whole.
And so that's the final thought I'd like to leave you with. If you started to look at your own health, not just as a physical state, but as this deep integration of your body, your mind, and your spirit, how might that change your personal view of what it truly means to be well?